Pikachu is an electric type. It can also learn moves from 11 other types. 4 types. It cannot touch at all. Here is every type Pikachu can use, ranked from the one barely anyone knows about to the one that made the franchise. Let's break this down. Flying. It landed in the hands of players who bought Pokemon Scarlet and Violet early enough. The Flying Tera-type Pikachu distributed as an early purchase bonus for Generation 9 carried Fly, the Flying-type physical move with 90 base power that required a charging turn to execute. As its exclusive move, which could not be passed down through breeding, could not be relearned through the Move Reminder NPC, and existed only on the distributed Pikachu that received it through Mystery Gift at launch. For a Pikachu operating with a Flying Tera type, Saipoisen Olbra Osiridwar Abensin Fly served a specific mechanical function beyond its base power. Terrestrializing into flying removed Pikachu's ground-type weakness entirely, converting its single most dangerous vulnerability into neutrality while providing stab on the fly it had been given for exactly this purpose. The charging turn between Fly's use and its execution, which allowed opponents to switch into flying-resistant Pokemon before the move landed, was a limitation the move shared across every Pokemon that used it. What made Fly specifically notable on Pikachu was the context around it, the most recognizable Pokemon in the franchise, receiving one of the most recognizable HM moves as an exclusive event-only distribution. The combination that any Pikachu in any game before Scarlet and Violet had simply not been able to perform. The type Pikachu had the least access to across the franchise's history was the one the franchise chose for its most visible Pikachu distribution. Fire. The elemental punch coverage that move tutors made available across specific games in the franchise's history gave Pikachu access to 3 punch-based type coverages that its standard learn set did not include, and Fire Punch was the one that addressed the narrowest competitive gap. Available through move tutors in games including Fire Red, Leaf Green, and Emerald, where the elemental punches could be taught to compatible Pokemon for a specific cost, Fire Punch provided Pikachu with a 75 base power physical fire-type move with a 10% burn chance that addressed the steel and grass types whose specific defensive profiles resisted or were neutral against the coverage that Grass Knot and Ice Punch more commonly addressed. The specific Pokemon that Fire Punch targeted and that neither Grass nor Ice moves could address efficiently, Scizor, Ferrothorn, Forretress, represented a category that physical sets building around Pikachu's Light Ball boosted attack stat had genuine reason to cover. Against Pokemon already addressed by Grass Knot or Ice Punch, Fire Punch was redundant. Against the Steel and Grass types specifically resistant to those options, it provided the coverage that completed the physical attacking profile. Most competitive Pikachu builds chose Grass Knot and Surf as their coverage slots before reaching Fire Punch's specific application, which placed it as the type that existed on Pikachu primarily for the trainers who had encountered the specific Steel and Grass threats that made the move tutors worth the cost. Ice. The move tutors that gave Pikachu Fire Punch gave it Ice Punch at the same opportunity, and Ice Punch's coverage profile was more broadly useful than its fire counterparts. Ice Punch provided a 75 base power physical Ice-type attack with a 10% freeze chance against the Dragon, Flying, Grass, and Ground types that Ice damage covered. A 4-category coverage spread that addressed some of the most common threats in standard competitive play. For physical Pikachu sets running the Light Ball that doubled its attack stat alongside its special attack, Ice Punch provided the same coverage that Ice Beam provided on special sets, but routed through the physical attack stat that the Light Ball was doubling. The specific matchup that Ice Punch most clearly addressed was Dragon types, the pseudo-legendary and legendary Dragon-type Pokemon that appeared throughout the competitive environment and that Pikachu's Electric Stab could not threaten, except at neutral damage on the rare Dragon types that also carried a Water or Flying secondary typing. A physical Pikachu with Ice Punch could threaten Garchomp, Dragonite, Salamence, and Flygon for super effective damage from the physical side of the damage calculation that those Dragon types' special defense frequently outperformed their defense in handling. The Grass types that resisted Pikachu's electric attacks were also covered, which gave Ice Punch a dual function that explained its appearance on physical Pikachu builds more consistently than Fire Punch's narrower application. Ground. Pikachu is immune to ground-type moves as a defensive receiver. Its ground typing as an attacker is accessed through Dig, the TM move available across multiple generations that had Pikachu burrow underground on the first turn and emerge to attack on the second, producing the two-turn structure that the community consistently flagged as a prediction vulnerability, while acknowledging that the 80 base power ground-type output it provided addressed the one category of opponent that made Pikachu most uncomfortable. Grounded-type Pokemon were immune to electric moves through their own typing. The immunity was absolute. No electric attack that Pikachu could use produced any effect on a ground-type opponent without the target having a secondary typing or specific ability that removed the immunity. Dig was Pikachu's answer to this structural problem, providing a ground-type attack that hit ground-type Pokemon for neutral damage and electric, fire, poison, rock, and steel types for super effective damage. The two-turn charging mechanic was the limitation that kept Dig from being a consistent competitive answer. A skilled opponent could switch into a flying type or levitating Pokemon during Dig's underground turn, converting the attack into a wasted two-turn investment. In casual play where prediction-based counters were less consistently deployed, Dig served as the most accessible tool for a Pikachu that had found itself in front of a ground-type Pokemon and needed something to do about it. Dark. 4 different dark-type moves that each did something completely different. Feint was a priority normal-type move in Generations 3 and 4 before becoming a normal-type physical attack, but in its dark-type adjacent role as a move that broke through Protect and Detect, it gave Pikachu an answer to the stalling mechanics that prevented most priority moves from dealing damage. Thief was a dark-type physical move that stole the target's held item while dealing 60 base power damage, a utility function that removed the Yachi Berry, Choice Scarf, or Eviolite from targets before they could use it, with direct relevance to competitive item management. Knockoff, available through move tutors in games where Pikachu could access it, dealt 65 base power dark-type damage with a bonus that boosted the damage to 97 effective base power against targets holding items, and then permanently remove those items, the single most disruptive item removal move in the franchise's competitive history. Nasty Plot, a dark-type status move that raised the user's special attack by 2 stages, gave competitive Pikachu one of the most potent setup options available to a Pokemon with 50 base special attack. The Light Ball, that doubled Pikachu's special attack to effective 100, combined with a Nasty Plot boost, produced a special attack multiplier that converted Thunderbolt from a manageable threat into something requiring immediate response. Dark-type moves gave Pikachu coverage, utility, disruption, and setup from 4 distinct moves that none of its other accessible types provided simultaneously. Steel. Iron-Tail arrived in Generation 2 and gave Pikachu the franchise's most iconic physical coverage TM, a Steel-type physical move with 100 base power, 75 accuracy, and a 30% chance of lowering the target's defense by 1 stage. The accuracy reduction from perfect was the move's primary limitation. 75% meant a roughly 1 in 4 chance of missing at the worst possible moment, which the community documented as a specific anxiety that competitive players building around Iron-Tail had to account for in sequences where a miss would cost the battle. The coverage it provided addressed rock, ice, and fairy types, the 3 categories most relevant to Pikachu's coverage needs in the generations where Iron-Tail was most commonly used. Rock types that threatened Pikachu through Stone Edge were covered. Ice types that could threaten ground-weak partners were addressed. Fairy types introduced in Generation 6 as the type that countered Dragon and Dark were hit for super effective damage, which gave Iron-Tail ongoing relevance beyond the generations where Dragon types had been the primary competitive threat. On physical Light Ball Pikachu sets where the attack stat was doubled and Iron-Tail's 100 base power operated from a genuinely threatening offensive position, the coverage it provided against fairy types was the most competitively significant application in the post-Generation 6 metagame. It was the franchise's answer to the question of what a physical Pikachu did about the defensive types that its electric stab could not address. Fighting, the type that broke through screens. Brick Break, the fighting type physical move with 75 base power that shattered Reflect and Light. Screen on the turn it was used gave Pikachu the ability to dismantle the defensive screen strategies that reduced the damage of its electric attacks by half. This specific application removing the barrier that cut Thunderbolt's damage output before it could be delivered, was the competitive rationale for Brick Break over other fighting coverage options on physical Pikachu builds. Focus Punch, the 150 base power fighting type physical move that required the user to remain in position on the turn it charged, provided the highest raw power output of any fighting move Pikachu could access at the cost of the specific vulnerability to being interrupted by any incoming damage before the attack executed. Low Kick, a fighting type move whose base power scaled with the target's weight, addressed the heavy physical and steel types that most commonly blocked physical offensive sequences. Heavier opponents took more damage, which made Low Kick specifically effective against the Snorlax, Steelix, and Rhyperior that appeared most frequently as physical walls. The fighting type's super effective coverage against normal, ice, rock, dark, and steel types addressed 5 categories that neither electric nor the other coverage types on Pikachu's standard build consistently handled. For a Pokemon whose primary offensive type was resisted by Grass, Electric, and Dragon, having fighting coverage available through TMs across multiple generations provided a physical offensive option that the type chart specifically needed. Fairy. Charm was a normal type status move for 5 generations and became a fairy type move in Generation 6, which meant that a move Pikachu had been using since its earliest learn set became fairy type Stab for Alolan Raichu and gained a new category relevance for Pikachu's coverage profile at the same time. Charm lowered the target's attack stat by 2 stages, a reduction significant enough to dramatically extend the survivability of a team against physical attackers, and one that Pikachu could deliver with perfect accuracy from the speed tier that let it move before most of the physical threats it was trying to neuter. Play Rough, the fairy-type physical move available through breeding in certain generations, provided Pikachu with a 90 base power fairy-type physical attack that directly targeted Dragon, Dark, and Fighting types for super effective damage. The Dragon coverage that Play Rough provided overlapped with Ice Punch's application while routing through a different type category. Dragon types that might carry specific resistance or immunity to ice moves were still addressed by Fairy's super effective damage, which gave physical Pikachu builds a second Dragon coverage option from a type that Dragon types had no defensive answer for. Charm's transition to Fairy type was the franchise's most elegant way of adding a new coverage category to Pikachu's profile without adding a new move. The same PP, the same accuracy, the same -2. Attack drop on the target, now classified as Fairy type, and counting toward coverage that the Generation 6 metagame had specifically restructured around. Grass. It solved the ground problem. Grass Knot was a grass-type special move with variable base power that scaled with the target's weight. Heavier opponents took more damage, which made it maximally effective against the categories of Pokemon most likely to cause a Pikachu player problems. Ground-type Pokemon were immune to electric moves, which meant every ground type that appeared in a matchup against Pikachu was a Pokemon that Thunderbolt, Wild Charge, Thunder, and every other electric attack in Pikachu's arsenal could not touch. Ground types were also, as a category, frequently heavy. The rock and ground types that combined both defensive typing categories tended toward the higher weight classes that maximized Grass Knot's base power output. Gastrodon, Hippowdon, Rhyperior, Swampert, and Quagsire. The water and ground Viking and dual types that were both immune to electric and resistant to electric's standard coverage partners all fell into weight ranges where Grass Knot dealt maximum or near maximum base power damage. The specific function Grass Knot performed in Pikachu's competitive role was converting its complete inability to threaten ground types into a specialized counter specifically optimized for the heaviest opponents in that category. A Pikachu running Grass Knot did not gain a general grass-type attack. It gained a specifically weighted answer to the ground-type immunity that represented its most fundamental type matchup problem, calibrated to be strongest against exactly the opponents that caused the problem most severely. Water. It had no right to be there. Surf's presence in Pikachu's Learn set began as a reward. In the original Pokemon Stadium's Japanese release, and subsequently through specific in-game challenges and event distributions, and the franchise's most iconic mascot learning the franchise's most iconic water move, produced a combination the competitive community embraced with an enthusiasm proportional to how unexpected the availability was. Surf provided Pikachu with a 90 base power water-type special attack that addressed ground types, fire types, and rock types for super effective damage. The three categories that collectively represented Pikachu's most significant coverage gaps against opponents that its electric stab could not threaten or could not threaten effectively. The specific matchup that Surf addressed most completely was the ground-type immunity problem. A ground-type Pokemon, switching into Pikachu, expected to absorb an electric move that could not damage it and use the free turn to set up, attack, or deploy an entry hazard. A Pikachu with Surf converted that expected free turn into a super effective water-type attack that the ground-type opponent was not prepared to absorb safely. Pikachu with Surf running the Light Ball that doubled its special attack to an effective 100 base points delivered Surf at a damage output that most ground types could not comfortably absorb, even with their water-type resistance partially offsetting the damage. The competitive community's assessment of Surf on Pikachu was consistent across the generations it was available. The most important coverage move Pikachu could access was the one that addressed the only type immune to everything Pikachu was designed to do: Normal. Quick Attack is the most strategically impactful move Pikachu knows that players rarely think about. The +1 priority. Normal-type physical move with 40 base power that always moved before standard attacks regardless of speed gave Pikachu a tool for finishing opponents that had been brought to low health by preceding moves, a damage source that bypassed speed calculations, and ensured Pikachu could remove a threat before the threat could retaliate with its own final attack. Fake Out was a priority. Fighting adjacent normal-type move. In the game's a normal-type physical move with 40 base power that flinched the target on the first turn Pikachu was in battle, with the priority that guaranteed it moved first and the flinch that prevented the target from acting. In doubles formats, Fake Out provided a turn of disruption against the most dangerous opposing Pokemon that could set up a partner's critical move, making it the normal-type move with the highest competitive impact in the formats where double strategy was the primary framework. Facade doubled its base power to 140 when Pikachu was afflicted with a status condition, burn, poison, or paralysis, converting a defensive setback into a dramatically increased offensive output. Last Resort, available as an egg move, had a base power of 140 and could only be used after every other move in Pikachu's set had been used at least once, making it a novelty in casual play and a specific calculation in dedicated Last Resort sets. The normal-type moves Pikachu learned from its earliest learn set were the foundation of everything: the priority, the utility, the damage ceiling that appeared when conditions aligned. Electric. Everything starts here. Thundershock at the beginning. Thunderbolt at base 90 power and 100 accuracy that the community adopted as Pikachu's default offensive move across competitive formats for 30 years. Thunder at base 110 power and 70 accuracy that became perfect accuracy in Rain, converting Pikachu from a reliable attacker into an uncheckable special threat on weather teams. Wild Charge at base 90 power, with recoil damage that gave physical Light Ball sets a physical electric stab option of comparable power to Thunderbolt's special output. Thunder Wave that paralyzed opponents with perfect accuracy and reduced their speed by half, converting the fastest threats in any format into manageable matchups. Nuzzle that paralyzed on contact with 20 base power, giving Pikachu a damaging paralysis move that the community adopted as one of the most reliably disruptive tools in doubles play. Volt Tackle at base 120 power with recoil, the signature move available only to the Pikachu evolutionary line, and the move that the anime deployed as Ash's Pikachu's most powerful attack across multiple high-stakes battles. Electro Ball that dealt damage scaling with the speed difference between Pikachu and its target, converting Pikachu's above-average speed into a damage multiplier against slower opponents. The electric type was not simply Pikachu's coverage, it was Pikachu's identity, the reason the franchise's mascot was chosen, the type that made yellow relevant, the category that made Ash's Pikachu, defeating legendaries legible, as something other than a plot convenience. Every other type on this list was coverage, this one was the character.